Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. Very excited to have three returning guests, both Andrea, Sarah, and Jim. Jim, it's been a while too, so very happy to have you back on here. I am stoked. Now, while I am stoked, y'all should be stoked. Hit the buttons, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff to get your emails in the morning whenever we go live, which, of course, is every day. Now, if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all throughout the show, by all means, hit them up in the comment section, kind of like this one, Winterstorm. Good morning, everyone. Watching from work. If Jim asks, I'm on a break. Excellent. Well, you can hang out on your break. I'm going to give you the permission for that one. Now, we're going to be talking about sharing culture today. Yesterday, we spoke a lot about the exchange of culture in terms of interpersonal relationships and what to share, what not to share, and all that kind of stuff. But today, I really wanted to focus on the concept of actively sharing a culture. So, how do we go about it correctly? How do we do it improperly? All kinds of things. I want to see how y'all feel about sharing your passions, your nerdery, your anything that you really you take to heart as your own culture, and how do you share it with others? So let's get some intros in before we get into the conversation first, and then we will engage from there. So, Andrea, you want to say another 10, 15 seconds, who you are, where you come from, and then we'll work our way down the line.
Awesome. Good morning. My name is Andrea Ross, and I'm based out of Squamish, British Columbia, just north of Vancouver. And I am a professional stunt woman, and I am the owner of Live Your Fierce Coaching.
Outstanding. Jim, how about yourself?
I'm just a couple hours away from that, Western BC as well. Police officer with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. That's it.
Bam. Sarah, how about yourself?
Sarah, based in Dallas, Texas. I'm a jiu-jitsu practitioner and coach and general lover of life.
I like it. Nice and succinct answers across the board. Excellent. So let's get to the conversation. I'm going to ask just a very simple question. How do you share your culture with the people around you? And I'm going to start right back at the top. Sarah, what are your first thoughts?
So for me, I'm more of a presence type of sharer. So I don't tend to outwardly share or, preach on a soapbox too much. I like to live the things that I believe in, whether it be activity or morals, and let my actions attract like-minded people. And so that's for me how I tend to share.
Interesting. Andrea, what are your first thoughts?
I think that my first thoughts are I'm very much in line with Sarah. I think most of what I'm nerdy and passionate about is sport and sport culture and, and getting teams together and being physically active. And I have always been I'm going to do it and set the example of what kind of athlete and coach I want to be. And if anyone shows interest or come in, it's door wide open, answering your questions, bring you in. And having fun that way, but it's not a recruitment based experience for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Jim, what about yourself?
Yeah, I think I'm on the same lines there. Culture is, I guess, not something immediately outward facing for me. I'm not like, hey Jim, hey, I'm Jim, here's my culture. I'm a bit of a sponge that way, so I like to see where the natural evolution of that relationship would go, and then try and work culture into that so we can get to know the individual better.
Interesting. Shaun, how about yourself? First thoughts?
Yeah, I guess my first thoughts are I'm just listening to the conversation, but more correctly, I'm overly focused on Chance Burles' intro. And so that is probably a good place for me to start the overarching theme of we formed a culture over here in the collective. Today is our culture. And today's conversation will form tomorrow's culture. But at one point, we had zero culture over here. And by the way, Chance Burles' intros used to suck. But now they kind of rock. I really look forward to Chance Burles' intros now. He's kind of day after day after day polished it up, cleaned it up, sparkled it up. Now it's like pro level in my opinion. So it's the culture that he has created through his intro helps launches into the conversation with new guests or repeat guests. If there's a guest who shows up tomorrow and they haven't been on the show for a month or two, well, guess what? Welcome to Chance Burles Intro 3.0. And it changes the culture over here. It changes the guests' expectations over here. At one point, we were pretty amateur. Well, we were rank amateur. Now we're not quite professional, but we're certainly above mediocre. But at one point, we weren't. And so every day we design the culture through these conversations, but it's always with an eye towards doing it better. And so that's my focus in today's conversation, at least for me. That's what I'm looking for from you guys. That's what I'm going to try to throw out, is the idea that culture, it should never be a static thing within us or around us. And so I think we should seek to always improve our cultural footprint and our cultural understanding. And the only way to do that is through wanting to do things better. I mean, culture sometimes just doesn't fall in your lap, or culture doesn't push up its way to you. You've got to do push-ups on your way to the culture. You've got to work to understand culture. You've got to strive. You've got to want more, in my opinion. And that's what Chance has done every day. Has tried to do it better and better and better. And we all benefit from it. And today's conversation, culturally, by the end of this, tomorrow's guests are going to benefit from it. So I just want to throw down the framework that culture just doesn't drop out of a tree like an apple. And it certainly is something that takes time and effort to see the fruits of your own personal or group labor. That's my first thoughts.
That is quite interesting. Andrea, I'm going to come back to you. You got any thoughts on that at all?
I do. I was just quickly writing it down so I didn't forget. I know that I led with, I'm a people come in, show interest, and I'm all about it. But I would say that there's one thing that I get kind of preachy about, and I really try and indoctrinate as many people as I can, mostly through coaching and whatever, being active with me. And that's really my goal, is to take all of the naysayers into yaysayers. When I see people lacking confidence or starting a conversation or showing up with, I couldn't do that, or I can't do that, or it's too hard, or I wish I was this person that could do it. That immediately is like, hi, I'm Andrea, and I'm going to change that for you. Let's hang out. And so that's the first thing that came to my mind, is I feel like that's the only time where I really try and bring people onto my side actively.
I like that. Sarah, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's awesome. But what I hear from both of you guys, in which I completely agree with, and which I think is cool about the collective as a podcast as well, is there's really just a culture of growth and surrounding yourself with people who are interested in pursuing that growth as well. Even though we all come from different backgrounds, professions, walks of life, parts of different countries, quite literally now. And so I think that's a really cool thing to come together with.
Indeed. Jim, any thoughts?
Yeah, very interesting way we're going here. The culture itself, I think, needs a starting place, and look at the collective here, and this is a great starting place. Everybody here has some sort of similar mindset, and we're coming together and forming something new. And just with any meeting or introduction into a group, I think there needs to be a little bit of a common thread between that group, and then you can expand from there and explore the nuances of each other's culture. But I think there needs to be a common thread to get things going.
That's interesting. I had a question on here about the initial interactions, or setting the stage for those interactions. So to the point of, we've had this conversation, or similar conversation about this previously, was, what you choose to wear in the morning, what you choose to, how you choose to carry yourself throughout the day sets the stage for any interactions you have with people around you. And that can lead to development of culture, or it can lead to a devolvement of culture as well. Because if I wake up and I throw on dirty clothes and walk around with a scowl on my face, I'm not going to gain anything from anybody as I walk around. In fact, most people will probably move out of my way and try not to engage with me. But if I put on a shirt that is, one of these mental Joe shirts or something like that, that gets people to like think, or, well, that's weird. What is that? And want to ask questions, and I have a smile on my face, then that engages culture as well. So, what are you guys' thoughts on, setting a personal stage on like when you wake up in the morning and like setting that opening salvo, for lack of a better term, on your own culture and how it interacts with others? Sarah, what do you think?
It's very Shakespeare of you, Chance, right? All the world's a stage. But I mean, I think that's true though, right? The way we present ourselves in the world is how we want to be seen in that day, right? Like, today I wore a hat, is it because I didn't wash my hair this week, or is it because I wanted to support the We Defy Foundation? No one really knows, right? But what people are going to walk away from is the We Defy Foundation. So I think that we do, even if we admit it or not, we make a lot of these choices very intentionally on how we want to show up based off of what our internal values and personal culture are.
Jim, thoughts?
I think it is incredibly important. This week I had the opportunity to meet for the first time representatives from 7 different countries, and I did make a point getting out of bed in the morning, making sure that I did look professional. I was coming into the new group or the new culture, representing Canada appropriately. So I think there is an importance on the first impressions on how you present yourself, but I also conversely think that you shouldn't get locked into that potential stereotype of what somebody looks like or how they're presenting themselves initially, because it may not turn out to be true, or you may explore something within that culture that your first perception wasn't necessarily accurate.
Interesting. Andrea, any thoughts?
2 thoughts come to mind. I think one, I've never, outside of when I was an athlete and, we had our uniforms, and when we traveled as a team wearing our Team Canada stuff. And, there's a sense of pride and collective, that you're there as a group. And that always kind of set the stage for one, how we behaved as a team out in public, and then getting ready for competition and, all of that. But I would say now, having hung up my singlet and wrestling boots, that it's, for me, it's not so much what I'm wearing and how I get out of bed is my focus. It's more when I step outside of my house and I'm around people I don't know. It's very easy to like smile around people you do know, and, and with your body language, be very open. And I think it's sometimes we don't realize that when there's, strangers or people we don't know what they're going through or where they're coming from, to either have different body language. And I know that something I've really tried to practice recently is strangers, people that I cross in the street, people in the cafe, like trying to have that open body language where there's either a bit of eye contact or just a smile or just some kind of positive energy coming out. And I think that that has just really changed how I've been able to meet new people. And it's that's how I want to show love and kindness and compassion to people that I might not even have a chance to have a conversation with.
Shaun, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. I've challenged people to smile more. People who just are walking down the sidewalk, portraying that they are Iron Man or they're the Terminator or whatever. Dude, you're 5'3". You're not the Terminator. And so I think Chance had said it, and then Andrea's reinforced the thought process for me, and that I suppose it doesn't matter whether it's veterans or first responders or, just standard issue guy who is just walking home and he's had a hard day, or girl. We can put on armor and keep everyone at bay. We can keep them at beyond arm's distance just by a stern look. In fact, I've got a look that will make most people wither if I deploy that look. And I try not to. But sometimes it slips out. Sometimes my resting face looks like, it's not that I'm angry with you, it just looks like I'm casually observing you with a little bit of disdain, maybe. Maybe that's the best way to categorize it. I just have a look that sometimes puts people off. And it's my natural resting look. So for me to switch from my observational, almost like, really, you're going to do that look? For me to switch from that, I have to put on like a smile. And the smile isn't like a mask and it doesn't feel fake. I just have to remind myself that most people don't appreciate my observational look. It's too mean looking, we'll call it. But I don't feel like I'm being mean-spirited. I'm neutral in that moment. I'm just observing and categorizing, studying, for lack of a better term. And my studying face looks like a mean face to some people. But I could be freaking happy in that moment studying something novel that interests me, but I have a certain focus that makes me look like I'm maybe even angry. But maybe it's the happiest I've been all day. I'm happy to study something that is worth deeply and intensely studying. So it's my job to recognize my baseline, my standard operating procedure, how I move through the world, and modify that based on who I'm interacting with in the moment, the culture around me. So Chance had said, walking down the sidewalk, you've got that armor on. It's easy to keep people at bay with an armor. But you got to know that maybe your armor, your default armor, is also putting people off, and you've never taken time to think about the vibe that you're giving off. So I have to modify my vibe when I step out my door to kind of like bring down my intensity of my normal daily workload, or how I talk in front of a microphone right now. If I let myself go, I'd probably put my stern face on and start launching with a little bit more velocity and vigor. So I have to dial myself back in front of a microphone. So the culture for me is understanding who I am at my natural state and then modifying my culture out there in culture. But I got to know why I'm doing it. I just don't walk out my door and think, time to be happy, Shaun. It's happy Shaun mode. That's not how I think. When I step out my door, I don't throw a happy face on instantly. I walk out my door as if I'm still in my house with my focused. I scan my surroundings. I make sure all 4 tires on my car have air in them, and etc. And so I start engaging in the outside world with my default cultural mode until I start bumping into people. Then I start reading them at a distance and I start adapting to the culture around me, which is not inauthentic, Shaun. It is just a spectrum of ways that I can manage the situation that's starting to unfold in front of me as they walk down a sidewalk or as I walk into a meeting. Now, to Jim's point, I walk out my door and I do me. But the moment that I'm representing something bigger than me, I do another me. It's the me that is dialed up even more. The sense of responsibility to represent my team, my country, my friends, my house, my neighborhood, whatever. If I'm representing something bigger than me, well, I typically double down on doing it right. So maybe that's wrong. Maybe I should double down on Shaun doing it right and then do less for a team. I don't know. I do way more for the team. I take the team way more serious than I take myself in the form of a representation or really, really trying to do the cultural moment correctly. So maybe that makes sense to you all. Maybe you've got some thoughts on it, but those are my first thoughts.
I like that. I was going to take us down that realm as well, but Jim, you have to do this on a pretty regular basis being in police work. You're going to be dealing with people of all different cultures with all different initial introductions to them, with all different ranging from, violence to absolute peace and calm. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what Shaun is talking about. Do you feel the same way, or is it slightly different?
No, I think Shaun, you hit on it at the end there. There's some nuance here. It's not one big global look at this. The nuances I was trying to pick out of your response there was there's a difference between actively sharing your culture in some sort of formalized format where you're expecting to do that, or people are expecting you to do that. There's a difference between the active representation of your culture, where you're not necessarily sharing, but you are representing it. And then there's a difference in that of just existing and being you. So I think there's various different streams of that whole thing, and knowing when to do that is definitely a learned behavior. The doing that multiple times on a daily basis between different groups, different cultures, different types of meetings is extremely difficult. And the thread that I found that works between all of that is listening. You have to be that open person to understand kind of what is coming at you, and be respectful of that by listening and understanding the individual or the group that you're interacting with.
Absolutely. Andrea, what are you thinking?
Yeah, there's a zillion different thoughts going through my head in like a bunch of different directions. I wanted what Shaun said about, the different versions of Shaun that show up depending on the circumstances, and that all of them are authentic versions of him. And I'm so curious as a collective, what the thoughts are on when do you show up just as you, and less as, representing the team, representing, the company, representing the family, and what that balance looks like. And it's been something that I've been pondering over this last actually few weeks of, I think, getting ready to like go hang out with family, and that I don't have an answer. I'm just answering with a question, because where is the balance, and what kind of things do you consider when we want to show our authentic self, because that's how we make the best connections with other people. I think that's when but then there are times when you should be putting your team and family first for the collective good. And I feel like people from the military and law enforcement have a better perspective, because it's so much more real than or not real, but it's I think more extreme. And so I'm curious.
Interesting. Sarah, I'm going to put you on the hot spot. What do you think?
Man, it's a big question. No, so to bring back Jim's point, and I forget which guest this was previous this week, but I believe it was the episode where you guys were talking about maybe like interacting with culture, cultural immersion. But the common sentiment was, when I am in a new space, I'm going to spend time listening. I'm going to spend time observing and taking in what the surrounding is and what the culture is maybe that I'm coming into. So for me personally, I guess to talk about Andrea's question is, I agree with you. I think it's so exhausting to have to show these different versions of yourself. And so for me, I work professionally in medical devices. I also work coaching. I'm also a mom. And so I have 3 big spheres that I have to bring myself to. And for me to show up as the best and most present version of myself, I essentially had to find a way to stay just as I am, but be respectful to my environment. And so with work, I spent time observing and listening and learning and adjusting to a civilian work environment post-military, and then figuring out how I could show up as my truest self, but staying appropriate to my environment. And that way, I just don't burn myself out trying to adjust myself or have to toggle the on and off switch, which I did when I was deployed. And when I came back from deployment, I felt like there was a bigger on and off switch, but that it was completely different and just truly not sustainable. But now I'm in this phase of long-term sustainability and moving through different cultural environments. in regards to daily life. So I don't know if that directly answers the question, but that for me, that's the way that I've learned to adapt to those different environments.
Absolutely. And to that point, I don't know if we've ever really answered a question on this show. We ask a lot of questions, but I don't know if we really answer any of them. But Shaun, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's good. So I think first things first, maybe establish what I consider as a baseline for Shaun versus baseline for Shaun within a team. So baseline for Shaun is when he's happiest, I guess. If I can find my happiest, get to that baseline in that moment, then it helps me contextualize against the rest of my day / the rest of my life. So what makes me happy? What makes anyone happy? Have y'all thought about what could be the happiest day of your life, or what could make you the happiest today for today's life? Do you think about that often? I do. And it usually falls into one of two categories. Usually I visualize it in my head. Not that I'm trying to visualize it to create it today. What I'm talking about is the moment that I think about where am I the most happiest, I can see kind of a couple of instances in my head. One is I'm typically riding my bike, like freaking shredding. That makes me happy. Doesn't matter why it makes me happy. It makes me happy. And the other thing that I think of when I'm kind of baselining what would be happy Shaun, what situation would make Shaun happy, it's typically around a campfire. But it doesn't have to be a campfire, because I'm not that into like smelling smoky all the time. So the campfire is kind of the proxy to set the setting, as it were. So it's a campfire and there's people around it. And it's not necessarily just my family, and it's not necessarily just my friends, and it's not necessarily my friends and my family. It's just people. It might even be people that I don't know. But I don't need to see their faces, and I don't need to feel the vibe. I just need the feeling or the visualized sense of I'm going to sit with some people and hang out, chill, learn, feel good about the moment. And we don't have to solve the dolphin language. We don't even have to talk. We just have to coexist and be cool. Now, that all sounds kind of weird, but for me, I know what makes me happy. It's hanging out with people that I like. Even if I don't know them, if I like them right away, we're going to be good. I'll sit at that campfire for the rest of my life. If I like you, we're cool. So I like to hang out with people who are cool, make me think, make me happy. And then I like to shred on a bike. And so two simple things, but I don't think enough people consider the one thing that would make them happy today, that they could set as a baseline to actually do again tomorrow and the next day. And so how can you understand how to live a better life if you've never thought about how to do it well today? Like engage in something that is going to be good for you today and then build off of that. So this is kind of how the collective started. Chance and I were talking quite some time ago about some of our earliest episodes, started talking about the influence of music, caveman drawings on a wall, what it meant to sit around a campfire with your club and your saber-toothed tiger on a spit or whatever. These kind of moments that are fundamental to the human condition, like in our freaking DNA. Going back how many tens of thousands of years ago that we've been doing this, hanging out, bouncing ideas off each other, trying to figure out the dolphin language, make our lives better somehow, engage in the spirit of human communication. It's what we're doing now, which was being done tens of thousands of years ago. But where it all falls apart or where it all stays together is the vibe. And so for me, culture, you could strike out the word culture and just scrawl in the word vibe. Because to me, that's what culture is. It's the vibe of what's in front of me. Whether I'm in the Louvre or whether I'm in a cave looking at scrawlings, it doesn't matter. To me, I look at the vibe. I try to feel the moment and what it means to me and how I can then translate that into my life and then translate it into other people's lives. Because I think what we're supposed to do is look at the thing in front of us, feel it, embed it into ourselves, and then somehow be able to translate that out to others in the future. We're supposed to be, it's going to sound weird, but I think we're supposed to be a living embodiment of culture, like carrying a torch and passing it on to the next person as a cultural moment or as a cultural wisdom or as a cultural influence, so that that scrawling on the cave wall will exist for all eternity. But if someone graffitis over it and never mentions it again, now it's gone. And so that's what culture means to me, is absorbing and passing it on to others.
Interesting. Jim, any thoughts?
I do have some thoughts. Andrew, you asked a question a while back about, who are you putting forward? Sarah, you kind of touched on it, that that could be exhausting in itself. I would agree with that. I guess I asked the question, is there a difference on who you're putting forward, whether that represents the group, the smaller group, the individual? I'm not sure there is a difference. And, Sarah, you're representing you're representing potentially the military, a company, a profession. Shaun, anybody in this group here is, I think, potentially hyper representative of themselves, their groups, their profession. I'm very cognizant of it, even right now. Am I talking to you as Jim? Am I a cop? Am I representing the RCMP Canadian? So there's a lot of nuance in there, and it is exhausting in some cases. So I'm actually struggling now listening to this conversation to separate, potentially the individual from your culture and what is it that you are presenting at any given time.
Do you think it's fair to say that at the most basic building block of this conversation, that you can either be a really good human and represent all of the things that are stacked on top of that, or you could be a really good police officer and try to stack all of those other things on that? For me, I prefer a good human who, that's the building block. Understand what makes you happy, understand what makes you sad, understand how you do things well, understand how you do things poorly as a human, as an individual, and then start representing or start demonstrating those other layers that you're obligated to represent or you feel obligated to represent. For me, I feel like I've just got to be good Shaun. And then all of the other things that I'm responsible to or for or did or will do, I rely on the good Shaun to kind of take care of and also be a good Canadian, as it were.
Jim, what do you think?
I would absolutely agree with that. There is a responsibility on the individual to set a strong value base for any of these interactions, and that will, I agree with you, Shaun, that will definitely underpin all of those different aspects. The other thought that I have in my head is, you can do that, but how is that interpreted, and what are you, even though you have a strong value base, how are you portraying that so that your individual value base or your group's values are properly represented or properly interpreted?
Actually, the problem that I see with that just now, as you stated that, I started quickly categorizing about 100 police officers of various sort of, we'll call them styles of policing. And I went to the extreme of someone who's a really, 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 a really nice person, but is also a bit soft. And so the other end of the extreme is someone who is maybe less nice of a person, but they're really hard. And so I suppose there's a time and place for everything. There's a time and place for that fundamentally amazing good person who's a bit soft on maybe being a first responder or a soldier or whatever the case is. They're still trying to grow into that position and trying to learn it to a degree where they are more effective, but at this point they're not as effective, but they're still a freaking super nice person. Versus the individual who's still got a whole lot to learn about themselves and can be a whole lot nicer, by the way. But they're also quite hard and they're good at their job, and maybe they're the person who's going through the window or through the door or whatever the case is. And so I suppose there's a time and place for each cultural individual, but finding finding the middle ground or being able to do both maybe is the real challenge, perhaps.
I got so many questions right now, but I'm going to hit a couple of these comments unless you, Sarah or Andrew, you got any thoughts on that initially? No? Okay. I just want to hit on these before we carry on with this because I have a really great question here. Glenn jumps in here, says, morning all. Good to see you, Glenn. Haven't seen you in a while.
Buddy.
Vanessa Chaos, happy Saturday, everyone. Winterstorm, I normally listen from work. On the weekend, I don't have to sneak glances at the screen. Winterstorm jumps in here, says, new merch idea, casual observation with disdain.
I said it reluctantly. It was just to make the point. Just to make the point.
That would make a perfect hat, just like disdainful looks. I like it. Glenn jumps in here, says, Jim hit it on the money. On top of all the groups you mentioned that you would interact with, adding on to that the different cultures from different squads is also another variable. 100% different squads, different partners, different all kinds of things will play into it. Now, the question I have is that, do you think that perhaps these different versions of ourselves, these different pieces that we bring to bear on any particular one subject or interaction, say being a good Canadian, being a good soldier, being a good police officer, whatever it is, that to really utilize those well, you have to be authentic in that position. So like, I could say, I want to be a good soldier, and I just do exactly what I'm told when I'm told, because that was my understanding of what a good soldier was at the time. But to be a good soldier, I still have to be a good person. I have to be a good me to begin with. So I'm wondering that, do you think that in order to utilize those different versions of yourself well, at its core, you have to understand how those different versions apply to you as a human being? Shaun, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
Well, I think that I wish you would have been there to brief me when I joined the military in 1983 and say, hey, Shaun, you got to be a really good soldier. Check. I'm going to work on that. But you also got to be a really good person. What? You said what? No one ever briefed me on that. So I was only briefed on the first part, which was go kick that ass. No one ever told me and be a really nice guy. But I wish someone would have, because I would have had a better head start on this whole game of trying to be a better human being. Because when I was in my 20s, I wasn't focused on being a better human being. I was focused on sharpening my spear. And sharpening a spear doesn't mean that you're smiling at everyone around you constantly. So I was never taught that. I wasn't taught it as a kid. I wasn't taught it in my military career. It's something that I've had to learn scrabbling my way through cultures. That every time I'd bump into a culture that would kind of side-eye me, and I'd have to learn like, oh, geez, they're all smiling and I'm not. Do you know how many iterations I had to go through bumping up against cultures to better understand that I'm actually not nailing this be a better human thing? I know how to levitate and shoot lasers out of my eyes, but I just don't know how to be a cool human being yet. I had to figure that part out, man. And the only way that I figured it out was by jumping on a plane and seeing the world, bumping into people that are doing it really well, talking to the guy at the bus stop who was wearing an orange robe, talking to the guy in the mountains who was living in a cave, talking to people that were extremely unique and brought to bear a radically different outlook than the one that I was bringing out into the world as basically a one-dimensional warrior. I knew how to kick that ass, but one-dimensionally. I didn't understand the 3D construct called the world, because I'd never really played in it before. I went out of high school, straight into the military. So when I came out of the military, I had a whole lot of learning to do. And it took many, many, many cultures to teach me that there are some really nice cultures out there that genuinely care about their entire population, etc., etc. And these were all new things to me. Not that Canadians as a whole don't care about their fellow Canadian. I'm just saying that there's parts of the world that care more. And so I had to bump into these things and understand that there's levels to the game of cultural caring, and then through that observation, I could look at my own personal game and realize that I was dropping the ball as a young man. I was very one-dimensional. So I think one of the things that culture can teach us is how little culture we have within us and time to get to work.
That's a great point, Andrea. Thoughts?
Yes, I think that first thought of when we are in, I'm going to use the word indoctrinated. That could be the wrong word, but whether it's military, for me it was elite level sports, and so indoctrinated into that culture, buying full in because that everything that they appear to stand for, you want to be a part of that, you believe in it, and it wasn't until I removed myself from what was not a positive culture. It was more of a toxic culture. And I got out of it. Did I realize how little I knew about myself, about what I stood for, about what I wanted to be, about what my values are, about, like Shaun said, what really makes me happy. And I had to fully step back and remove and fumble around to find out what those things were before I could kind of go back in with that. I think, was it Shaun or Jim, that baseline of who I am, what makes me happy. And then I could go back into those other cultures and groups, knowing that these are my personal goals and values, and I'm happy to show up where those match. And then I have to navigate when there's differences where, that is not what I stand for. I can't show up that way because that is not authentic to me. But I am, and finding that confidence in that way to figure out. And like you said, Shaun, it's through that self-discovery. And I did not do it necessarily the easy way either. And I continue to do it and figure out. But I think that it has been the greatest gift I've given myself, is to actually figure out, those things and showing up. And it has changed how I see people, strangers on the streets, how I make connections, because the one lesson I really learned out of all of that is that it's not all about me. How people in a culture or a group, how they treat you, how they show up, how they stare at you with a resting face of disdain, or bitch face or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean they're making thoughts or judgments on me. And that I can just, if I find a way to smile and keep myself open until they tell me, hey, you are the problem, but just by smiling at them, and then they're like, there's just so much magic in that. And that came with having the confidence of knowing what, and trying to figure out what I stood for and what made me happy. And then being okay with people looking at me in very interesting ways. I was no longer afraid to look at them that.
I like that. Sarah, thoughts?
Yeah, I think what we're really talking about is, like when we're young, we are, we leave the culture of our family unit and we go into the world, into whatever new culture shock that might be. Like for me, it was military college, like for Shaun, it was the military. Andrea was like elite sports, right? And we don't have a personal identity or a firm understanding of that personal identity. And so we're trying to navigate these different cultural experiences and understand not only ourselves in the world, but understand these different cultures in order to grow up and find out who we are as people. And I think once we have that foundation of personal identity, then it becomes easier to navigate these different cultures with great appreciation.
I like that a lot. Jim, any thoughts?
Yeah, I can relate with all of you. I can relate with Shaun with what he said. I too was good at what I was doing, but I was loving a very small part of the culture that I should have been paying more attention to, and definitely needed to grow as a person, I guess. Chance, you mentioned you can be a good soldier, but is that the entire culture that you should be trying to embody? I'll tell a quick story here. I met a guy from LAPD today, and this weekend was relaying a similar story where he was a good cop for a long time until he saw a group of kids that he wasn't helping. He ended up opening soccer fields in an impoverished area, in a gangland area, and made some incredible difference. So just expanding your mind, I guess, is kind of what I'm getting from this last interaction of, what part of the culture are you trying to emulate? Are you picking out all the good parts?
Absolutely. Now, I have I had this thought just a second ago while we were all talking, and we all have these unique personalities, right? We all have our own personalities, and we look around at other people and so we're like, oh, those are you. Shaun, you brought up a unique personality, like someone wearing an orange robe, or someone living in a cave, or something, whatever. And it brought up to mind that when you speak with other military personnel, or Jim, you speak with other policemen, or Andrew, you speak with other people in the film industry, and they do different things, and it's almost inconceptual how they do those things, right? You sit and you talk with the infantry guys, and you're all like, you guys run into machine guns? Like, why? And then I could tell the story, and it would be, you handle live explosives that the enemy put down? Why? Right? It seems odd to us because it is unique. But within those environments, it's totally normal, right? Like within the engineers, it is a total normal thing to handle high explosives or minefields or whatever. That's just how we do things. And so I'm wondering, engaging with those unique personalities outside of our own cultures, outside of the initial ball, I guess, how do we get young people, 20-year-old selves, right? How would we be able to step out of that culture? Because when I first got in the military, I was told very clearly, you are no longer Chance. You are now Canadian Forces soldier, ... So anything you do now reflects upon not only the forces, but on Canada, on blah, 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 and all these things. And so you just kind of assume, like, oh, well, I guess I'm no longer myself. I'm now this. I'm now the big green machine. So how do we get the young people that are just entering into those situations where they're now entering into a completely unique culture to not totally subsume themselves into that culture and still allow them to build upon that culture outside of it, if you guys get my meaning? Sarah, I'm going to come right back to you. What do you think?
Okay, so I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. So are you talking about, essentially allowing, well, I mean, let's just say I'll use myself as an example, like little new enlistee Sarah, who has come into the military to maintain whatever version of identity I have, but still becoming part of the unit or the system.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
I mean, I think that's really tough, because I think there is a true method to the madness in how we bring somebody to the basement, or we break somebody down to make them stronger and part of a more cohesive unit. I don't think that's appropriate in all situations, right? The military is highly unique, or like an elite team setting, or maybe law enforcement, first responder type environment, because in these environments, you ultimately want somebody to perform a task at a fundamental level under high stress and be able to respond to a position of leadership, who's asking them to potentially put themselves in mortal peril without question. And I don't know. I mean, that might be a good question for like Dr. Gino, honestly. Is, you know, are you still able to build that type of resilience and loyalty without first stripping everything you were before coming into that unit?
That is my question. Yeah. Andrea, what do you think?
My first instinct is to say, I think that Sarah is right. And I'm trying to figure out how to put in words like what comes next, because I do believe, whether it's, sport or vocation, or when you're entering a certain culture, I believe that there, in a perfect world, theoretically should be an innate trust in that culture and system, that they have rhyme or reason for doing what they do, either to keep you safe, to keep the group safe, to achieve a certain goal. And I think without 100% buy-in, that is really hard to achieve. I think then I would follow it with, what is next? Because, culture and systems are great when they're working well, but I think we all can say that they don't always work well. And so then at what point, how do we question the culture of the system once we're in it and we've been open to exploring what it truly is, because I think that we have to maybe be a little, sorry, my dogs are losing their mind right now. There's a squirrel outside for sure. Also, Chance, terrible dogs. Well, not well trained. You wouldn't like them. But to get back to my point, I'm very curious. Yeah, what are the next steps? Because you buy in, how do you then, I think, finding yourself again? And maybe that is like part of the curve, is like you lose yourself through trust in this journey to join this culture. But then maybe one of the follow-up steps is to then come back and find pieces of yourself that either match or line up with that culture, so that you don't lose yourself entirely.
I like that. Jim, thoughts?
Yeah, I think that is a brilliant question. I think your evolution as a host has hit a new level. I wish. So I was thinking about this completely wrong. I think where we're sharing our culture externally. I think this is a great redirection on sharing your culture internally. And I would say the easiest thing is listen to the collective. This is a cultural change phenomena, I think, that's happening. And I wish, to answer your question specifically, I wish stuff like this was around when I was young, because it wasn't talked about. Sharing the good parts of your culture wasn't something that was necessarily done. So I think that's the essence of this show, is or the essence of your question was making sure that you take those value systems, take everything you've learned, and then share that to someone like your younger self, so that they can grow as well. Point them in the right direction to things like this, where they can listen and grow and share that culture internally, so you build a strong internal culture so that you can project appropriately outward.
Thank you. That's awesome. Shaun, what are you thinking?
Thank you, Jim, because what we did say way back in the day, Chance and I, in fact, I categorized it as such. Man, it sucks that 20-year-old Shaun didn't know anything and there was no one there to teach him. I just didn't know that much. There was nothing like this. The internet didn't exist. And so to find this kind of wisdom from guests like this, it just wasn't out there, man. And when I stepped into the military, the voices that I heard all around me were the institutional voices, not like broad-ranging, deeply traveled, worldly, multifaceted, from multiple industries advice. It was very one-dimensional. It was very task-focused, mission-focused, job-focused, being infantryman-focused. My basic training taught me in the military to be a great soldier within a year, but it didn't teach me how to be a great human. No one ever taught me that. I've only learned it through observing other great humans. And so my trajectory on becoming a better person has been haphazard. It's been almost random at times, where I wasn't even focused on trying to meet awesome people. They just simply bumped into me and were awesome. And I didn't even recognize it at the time. I didn't recognize how awesome they were until many years later. And regretfully, I can't thank them. And regretfully, I can't hang out with them anymore because I don't even know where they are in the world right now. And so I think, when we're young, we just don't understand ourselves fully enough to understand what our internal culture is. And then when we step into an institution called the military or policing or wrestling or whatever the case is, into a new, much larger organization that is going to start defining us, that's what happens. We get defined by that large institution. And some of us, maybe even me, we lose our way in it. We kind of forget about our internal culture, and we let the large institution define our culture, and then somehow we become the institution and maybe get lost in it a little bit. And so how to not get lost, how to have a more worldly view, how to see the bigger picture all around you, I think it really comes down to understanding why you're there for the job, for the people to your left and right and all of that good stuff. But at the same time, want more for yourself in the world, to understand more about the world. And now that sounds kind of selfish, that you want to be all that you can be for your team within the culture that you've self-selected and become freaking mega. That it sounds selfish to then say, but also focus on anything else but the team. Focus on something outside of the team. Be selfish. Well, it's not selfish. Because what you're doing is through that looking beyond the horizon to enter into a new culture that has no relationship to becoming maybe a tier 1 operator or whatever the case is that you want to be. By looking at something way over the horizon, unrelated, if you can engage in that and just get a little bit better, you're bringing it into your team. Or once you leave your team, many years later, you'll be able to tell a story to someone on a bus stop that changes their life, that has got nothing to do with when you had a dagger in your teeth. It's got everything to do with just connecting with another human through a cultural moment where you get to pass along something that is commonly called humanity, not called, I used to be on this thing called a team. And so I think our job as individuals is to do our best within our culture while striving to expand our culture beyond the horizon.
Bam.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I guess this really goes to Shaun and Jim, because we're talking about, like, yeah, I wish I would have had this when I was younger, or like, how do we, bring this to, the 20-year-old versions of us that are now in the world. But would you be able to appreciate this perspective and how deeply you feel passionate about bringing that best version of yourself to the table had you not gone through those hardships in your younger years and all the different formative experiences that have shown you the value in being a good person now?
That's a very good question, Jim. I'm going to put you on the fire.
Yeah, I would like to think I would have been appreciative. My first few years in the organization, I was looking at the same 2 or 3 people, and there was no, internet. There was no social media. There was no collective. I didn't have a chance to learn from a variety of different people in different industries with different experiences. So I would like to say, yes, if this would have been available, I'm appreciative of it now. So I would like to think I would have been the same at the time, knowing that I was searching for mentors, for perspectives. So if it was available, I think I would have jumped on it, but hindsight is 20/20. So.
Yeah. Shaun, what about yourself?
I want to believe that I would have listened. I want to believe that I would have picked up what we're throwing down, but I'll hedge my bets and say that I wouldn't have 100% embraced everything that everyone says today or yesterday or says tomorrow. I'm going to hedge my bets and say, no, I wouldn't have listened to it all, but I would have listened to some, and some is better than none. 4% is better than 0%. And so even if I would have been actively trying to ignore this podcast, it would have seeped into my tiny little peanut and infected me with goodness. And you know what the thing of, for me anyway, I can speak for myself. The moment that something, what? You said what? What's even going on over there? Once you've got my attention, it's freaking on like Donkey Kong. And so maybe in that first podcast, I would have been like, these guys are clowns. Well, he said, what? Hang on a sec. If I do a hang on a sec, that's it. I'm now a lifer until I figure it out, until I understand either it's good for me or it's a pile of knuckleheads and I don't ever want to hear them again. And we've yet to have a knucklehead over here. And so I want to believe that the first time I would have listened to this podcast, I would have like raised my eyebrows or squinted my frown and thought, what the heck? But then I would have been hooked. I would have been in. You know what I probably would have done at 20? I would have heard Jim say something and thought, what the heck? What does that guy even know? And then I would have shown up to the podcast the following day to see if someone else said something dumb. But they don't. And I would have learned through the process by, maybe if I was chippy when I was 20, or was angry at the world when I was 20, or whatever the heck I was when I was 20, whatever that young Shaun would have been, there would have been something in this conversation that would have like made my mind trigger on, oh, I need to know something more about this. What are these guys even talking about? My natural curiosity would have led me down the rabbit hole for sure. So I hope that answers your question.
Andrea, you got any thoughts on it?
I don't want to follow that up. John, yep. Yeah.
I like it. I was thinking something similar too, in the fact that when I was young, I don't think I would have listened to, if someone were to show me one episode of this, I don't think I would have listened. But if I had seen 3, 4, 5, whatever, like a chunk of them from different realms of where we started to where we are now, I think after like 2 or 3, I would have been like, okay, wait a second, like they all seem to be talking about something similar. They all seem to know what they're talking about. And then also, depending on the people we have, right? Like Shaun, when you were young, if they had a podcast with, somebody from Vietnam, from the SEALs from Vietnam, like a legend in the forces, that you were like, oh, that guy knows what he's talking about. Okay, I'll listen to that. Or someone who would, like, pinnacles of the era, let's say, then I think they would be more enlightened to talk about this. Because as you've said, Shaun, like if you have a bunch of dusty librarians or people who've have all their knowledge from books, they might be spouting the same knowledge, but it's less, it wouldn't be as absorbable. Whereas you have someone like yourself who has all this experience, someone like Jim who has all these, Sarah, like you guys have been all over the world, you've done all kinds of things, you have all different views, and yet we're still talking in the same line. And I think that's what allows people to kind of absorb it, is that the experiences are valid versus, I read it in a book from 2,000 years ago and they say this. So I think that as a part of it, at least in my mind. Now, we are a little bit over time, so I want to go down the table. First off, thank you guys so much. We came into this podcast and I wasn't 100% sure where we were going to go, but this turned into a fantastic conversation, so I really do appreciate it. Sarah, Jim, Andrea, fantastic. Love chatting with you guys all the time. Let's get some final thoughts, and then we'll shut her down for the afternoon. Sarah, I'm going to start with you. Final thoughts on anything we've gone over today?
As always, it was such a pleasure. Go back and listen to all the different guests and episodes because there's a little bit for everybody in the show.
Bam. Nice. Jim, final thoughts?
Yeah, just listen, expand your mind. Don't look through a toilet paper tube at life. Take the bigger picture in.
I like it. Andrea, anything?
I would say get on the collective culture train, because it will ask those tough questions. It will give you so many insight, and maybe some of it will stick and resonate, but it's a pretty dope group to be a part of.
It's pretty nice. Shaun, final thoughts?
It is a pretty dope group to be part of, and I'm real glad I'm part of today's group. I sometimes I shake my head after a podcast and think, how on earth did I get to spend some time today with cool people like that? I often wonder how I put myself in this position, or how I fell out of the apple tree and ended up in front of a microphone. It's weird, man, but I dig it, and that's life. Like, we either embrace it or we don't, and I'm embracing this moment. I'm embracing this trajectory of hanging out with cool people, a dope group. I dig it. That's what we should all be pursuing, is a dope group to bounce ideas off and get their ideas bounced off of you, so that you can become not just better at life, but more resilient with your understanding of who you are culturally, internally, so that you can do good in the world externally, which is really what we're trying to do over here. We're not trying to solve the dolphin language. We're just trying to be good people, helping other good people that want to get better. So if you're into that, choo-choo, hop on the train.
Get on the collective train. New merch idea right there. Hop on the collective cultural train. Something like that. Anyway, I don't have a whole lot to add. I think this was a fantastic conversation. Really, the key thing I took out of this is learn how to ask yourself questions. Build upon those questions, and then grow as a human being through the answers that you find. And you can do that with us every day here on The Collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.